The air conditioning in courtroom 4B hummed like a tired old refrigerator, rattling every few seconds as if it, too, had been called to testify and didn't want to be there. It was a Tuesday morning in March 2024, and the Fulton County Courthouse in downtown Atlanta smelled the way old government buildings always smell. Oak polish, photocopy toner, and the faint ghost of 40 years of other people's bad days. I sat on the left side of the gallery, back straight, hands folded in my lap the way my mother taught me to sit in church. My name is Clara Mae Johnson Whitfield. I am 61 years old, and 3 rows in front of me sat the boy I helped raise, now a grown man in a Navy Brooks Brothers suit, who had looked his lawyer in the eye that morning and called me confused. Derek Whitfield was 49. His shoes were Italian. His watch was a Rolex Submariner, the same one his father had bought himself on his 60th birthday, the one I had wrapped in tissue paper and tied with a red ribbon, while Raymond laughed and said, "Clara, honey, you're going to spoil me." Derek had taken that watch out of the jewelry box 2 days after the funeral. He hadn't asked. He hadn't even looked at me when he clasped it on his wrist. He wasn't looking at me now either. He was leaning toward his attorney, Margaret Sterling, whispering something that made her smile the tight professional smile of a woman who billed $800 an hour and had never lost a case against a widow. Behind him, his wife Ashley sat with her Louis Vuitton bag balanced on her knees like a small dog. She caught my eye once and arranged her face into a look of soft, performative pity, the kind of look white women give black women in department stores when they want to seem kind without actually being kind. I looked away first, not because I was afraid, because I didn't want to waste a single breath on her before the judge came in. My daughter Simone sat beside me, 29 years old, Columbia Law, sharp as a blade and built like her father, tall, freckled, amber eyes. She reached over and squeezed my hand once. I squeezed back. We didn't speak. We'd done our speaking last night on the phone at 2 a.m, when she'd called crying and I'd told her the only thing I could think to say. "Baby, your mama is not fragile. Your mama is just finally loud." My attorney, Desmond Holloway, sat to my right, going through a stack of manila folders the way a pastor goes through a Bible before Sunday service. Slow, deliberate, touching each page like it mattered. Desmond was 52, Howard Law class of 98, born on the west side of Atlanta to a schoolteacher and a postal worker. He had looked at the documents in my leather briefcase 3 weeks ago and said very quietly, "Mrs. Whitfield, they don't just owe you an apology. They owe you half a company." I had told him, "I don't want half. I want what's mine. And I want them to say my name in a room full of witnesses." That was the whole reason we were here. The bailiff called us to rise. Judge Patricia Holloman entered, 64 years old, black, a former prosecutor out of DeKalb County who was known in legal circles for 2 things, starting court exactly on time and having 0 patience for what she once called Atlanta money trying to lawyer its way around Atlanta truth. She sat down, we sat down, and I reached up and touched the left pocket of my gray blazer, where my father's old Parker fountain pen rested against my chest like a small blue heart. A woman who can write her own name, my father had told me the day I left for nursing school in 1980, can sign her own life. 41 years I had carried that pen. 41 years I had been married. 30 years I had sat quietly while men in boardrooms called my husband a self-made man. I wasn't afraid anymore, because I had something they didn't expect. A folder, a signature, and 4 decades of silence about to end. My mother cleaned houses in Macon, Georgia for 36 years. My father was a carpenter who built church pews and kitchen cabinets, and once a small wooden desk for me when I turned 14, and announced at the dinner table that I was going to be a nurse. He didn't say much. My father was not a man of big speeches. But 2 weeks later, that desk appeared in the corner of my bedroom, smelling of pine and lemon oil, with 1 drawer and a brass knob he had hand-polished himself. I still have that desk. It's in the sunroom of the Buckhead house now, though Derek's lawyers are trying to pretend the Buckhead house isn't mine either. My name is Clara Mae Johnson, and I was born in 1962 in a small yellow house on Pine Street, 3 blocks from the Ocmulgee River. I grew up on collard greens and Bible verses and the kind of southern quiet that isn't really quiet at all. It's just women saving their words for later. My mother taught me how to iron a collar, how to pray for enemies, and how to keep a receipt for everything. Especially, she said, keep a receipt when a man tells you not to worry about it. I remembered that later, Lord, did I remember that. I was the first person in my family to go to college. Fort Valley State Nursing Program, graduated in 1983. I drove a second-hand Buick to Atlanta with $320 in my checking account and a job offer from Grady Memorial Hospital, the big public hospital downtown, the one that serves anyone who walks through the doors, whether they can pay or not. I started in the emergency room. 22 years I stayed there, all told. 22 years of gunshot wounds and car accidents and children with fevers and old men with hearts that had finally decided they were tired. I was good at it. I'm not bragging. I'm stating a fact the way my mother taught me to state facts, plainly, without apology. I was good at staying calm when everyone else was screaming. I was good at reading a man's face and knowing whether he was telling the truth about his pain or lying to get medication. I was good at holding the hand of a stranger while a doctor worked on his chest. That's where I was, on a Thursday night in the summer of 1982, when Raymond Whitfield walked into my life with a broken wrist and a story about a ladder that had betrayed him. He was 23 years old, a young civil engineer fresh out of Georgia Tech. Tall, sandy hair, blue eyes, sunburn across the bridge of his nose. He was white, and we were in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was 1982, and I already knew before I finished taking his blood pressure that he was going to be a complication. He came back to the ER 2 weeks later with a box of peach cobbler from his mother's kitchen and an apology that wasn't really an apology. "I didn't get your name," he said, "and I've been thinking about you for 14 days, and my mama said if I didn't come back and ask, she'd stop speaking to me." I said, "Your mama sounds like a smart woman." He said, "She is. So are you. I could tell before you took my pulse." We got married in 1983 at First AME Church on Auburn Avenue. My father walked me down the aisle. His father didn't come. His mother came, cried through the whole ceremony, and hugged me afterwards so hard I couldn't breathe. That woman, Margaret Whitfield her name was, same as Derek's lawyer now, which is a coincidence that has haunted me more than I want to admit, became the mother-in-law of my prayers until the day she died in 2004. Raymond already had a son. His name was Derek. He was 8 years old, and his biological mother had left when he was 2, and he had the saddest little face I had ever seen on a child who wasn't sick. I married Raymond on a Saturday and became Derek's mother on a Sunday. Not his stepmother, his mother. Because a biological woman who leaves is not a mother. She is a person who was there for a while, and the woman who stays is the one who earns the name. I earned that name. I want to be very clear about what I earned. I helped that boy with his spelling words. I taught him how to read frog and toad in the snowy day, sitting on the floor of his bedroom with my back against his twin bed. I sewed the patches on his Little League uniform. I drove him to the emergency room when he was 9 and had pneumonia so bad his lips turned blue, and I sat by his hospital bed for 3 nights counting his breaths because I had seen too many children at Grady whose parents didn't count, and those children died. He called me Mama Clara until he was 16 years old. 16 years old is when a boy starts figuring out that the world treats him differently depending on whose hand he's holding. 16 is when Derek started introducing me to his new private school friends as my dad's wife. Not my mother, not even my stepmom. My dad's wife. Raymond noticed. Raymond spoke to him about it. Derek cried and said he was sorry, and he went back to calling me Mama Clara for about 3 weeks, and then he stopped again. By the time he graduated high school, he had settled on a compromise. He called me Clara. Just Clara, like I was a cousin, like I was the woman who watered the plants. I didn't make a scene. My mother raised me not to make scenes. My mother raised me to keep receipts. I kept them. In 1995, Raymond wanted to quit his engineering job and start a real estate company. He had been working for a firm in Midtown for 12 years, helping build office parks and shopping centers for other people's money. And he came home one Tuesday night in July and sat down across from me at our little kitchen table on Fair Street and said, "Clara, I want to do this on my own. I want to buy distressed properties, fix them, rent them out. I've been running the numbers for 6 months. It works. I know it works." I said, "What do you need?" He said, $47,000 and a wife who believes me. The bank had already told him no. His credit was fine, but he had no collateral. We were renting our house, and his savings were tied up in Derek's private school tuition because Raymond insisted on that. And I had agreed because Derek needed stability, and I was not going to be the black stepmother who pulled the white child out of his school. I had principles about that. I still do. But there was one thing we had. One thing I had. My mother had passed in 1993. She had left me the yellow house on Pine Street in Macon, the house I was born in, the house my father had built most of by hand, the house that smelled like cornbread and Murphy oil soap and had a front porch swing my father installed the summer I turned 9. It was the only thing of real value my family had ever owned. Free and clear. Paid off in 1981, 3 years before my mother died, after she'd scrubbed other people's floors for 3.5 decades. I could mortgage it. I could borrow against it. I could turn my mother's lifetime of knees on linoleum into $47,000 of seed money for a man I loved. I went to the Macon branch of SunTrust Bank on a Friday morning and sat across from a loan officer named Mr. Henry Pruitt, and I signed the papers with my father's Parker pen. I got a cashier's check for $47,000, and I drove back to Atlanta, and I put the check on the kitchen table in front of Raymond, and I said, "This is my mother's house. Don't make me regret it." He cried. Raymond was not a crying man, but he cried that day. He held my hands, and he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Clara, I swear to God this company is as much yours as mine. If I ever try to pretend otherwise, you take me to court yourself." I laughed. I actually laughed, because the idea of taking Raymond to court was the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. 2 weeks later, on August 14th, 1995, we drove to the office of an attorney named Benjamin Rosenthal in Buckhead, and we filed the incorporation papers for Whitfield Properties, LLC. The operating agreement was clear. Raymond Whitfield, 51%. Clara M. Johnson Whitfield, 49%. Rosenthal notarized it. We each took a copy. Raymond put his in the company safe. I put mine in a leather briefcase that had belonged to my father, which went into the back of my closet, where it sat for nearly 30 years. I cut back to part-time nursing that fall. I couldn't quit outright. Raymond couldn't run the new company alone, and we couldn't afford to hire help, and we also couldn't afford to lose my income. So I became the company bookkeeper, the property manager, the receptionist, the cleaner of freshly renovated units, and, on the one weekend a month when we didn't have help, the painter. I worked weekends and some evenings at Grady for the next 13 years. I finally retired from the hospital in 2008, with 22 years of service and a pension I hoped I would never have to touch. I wore paint-stained overalls in 1996 and 1997 that I still have in a box somewhere. We made it. The first year was awful. The second year we broke even. By 1999, we owned 23 units across Atlanta. By 2003, we owned 81. And in 2003, the company almost died. The dot-com crash had rippled into commercial real estate. 2 of our biggest tenants defaulted. A bank line of credit got called in early. Raymond came home one Sunday night in April and sat on the edge of our bed and put his face in his hands and said, "Clara, I don't know how to tell you this. We're going to lose it. All of it. I'm going to have to file by Friday." I said, "How much?" He said, $180,000. To cover the line, pay the vendors, and keep us breathing until the Lindbergh units stabilize. I had a nursing pension from Grady, 19 years of payments by that point. I had never touched it. I touched it that week. I pulled out $180,000 from my retirement, wired it into the company operating account on a Thursday afternoon, and drove home in a rainstorm so hard I had to pull over on Peachtree Street and wait it out. Raymond was waiting on the porch when I got home. He knew what I had done. He hadn't asked me to do it. He never would have. He wrote me a letter that night, handwritten, notarized the next morning by a woman named Eloise Perkins at a Bank of America branch on Ponce de Leon Avenue. It read, "I, Raymond Whitfield, acknowledge that without my wife, Clara M. Johnson Whitfield's decision to mortgage her family home in Macon in 1995 and her personal loan of $180,000 in 2003, Whitfield Properties, LLC, would not exist today. Her 49% ownership stake is not symbolic. It is earned, documented, and permanent. If anyone, including my son Derek, ever attempts to claim otherwise after my death, this document shall serve as my sworn testimony to the truth. Raymond Whitfield, April 24th, 2003. He gave it to me. He said, 'Put this somewhere no one will find it until you need it.' I put it in the leather briefcase, behind my copy of the 1995 incorporation papers. I never showed it to anyone. Not my sister, not my daughter, not our pastor, no one. For 21 years it sat in a briefcase in the back of a closet in a house in Buckhead, Georgia. And I did what women in my family have always done. I kept my receipt. And I waited. Raymond died on November 11th, 2023. It was a Tuesday. He had been fine that morning. Cranky, actually, because the coffee maker was broken and he was trying to fix it with a screwdriver in a YouTube video. He kissed me on the forehead at 9:15 and said, "I'm going to the Lindbergh office, back by 4. He had a stroke in the parking lot at 11:40. A landscaper named Marcus Freeman found him and called 911. They took him to Piedmont Hospital. He was gone by 2 in the afternoon. I drove myself to the hospital. I don't remember the drive. I remember the smell of the emergency waiting room. The same smell as Grady, a smell I know in my bones. And I remember a young doctor with kind eyes telling me my husband had passed. And I remember saying thank you to her because my mother raised me to thank people even when they tell you the worst news of your life. Simone flew in from New York that night. Derek and Ashley came over the next morning. Derek hugged me. He said, "Mama Clara, I'm so sorry. We're going to get through this together." He hadn't called me Mama Clara in 28 years. I should have known then. Looking back now, from the other side of everything, I can see the exact moment he decided to call me Mama Clara again. It was the moment he realized there was no will in the safe, or at least no will that he knew about. It was the moment he started calculating. The funeral was at First AME on Auburn Avenue, the same church where we had gotten married 40 years earlier. Derek gave the eulogy. I want you to hear what he said, because I have replayed it in my mind more times than I want to admit. He stood at the pulpit in a black suit and said, "My father was a self-made man, a one-man empire. He came from nothing and built something that will outlive all of us. He was my hero, my mentor, and my best friend. He built Whitfield Properties with his own 2 hands." He didn't say my name, not once, not in the whole eulogy. I sat in the front pew with Simone, and I watched my sister Vanessa lean over to my other side and whisper in my ear, "Clara, did that boy just erase you in front of God?" I said yes, and God saw it. 3 weeks later, Derek's personal attorney, a man named Brooks Whitaker, mailed me a registered letter. It informed me that Raymond had left a verbal directive, not a written will, a verbal directive, that 100% of Whitfield Properties, LLC, was to transfer to Derek upon Raymond's death. It informed me that I would be receiving a gratuity of $85,000 in recognition of my decades of support. It informed me that I had 60 days to vacate the Buckhead house, which Derek's lawyers claimed Raymond had purchased before our marriage. A lie, because the house was bought in 2001 and the deed listed both of our names as joint tenants with right of survivorship. I read that letter 3 times at my kitchen table. Then I walked into my bedroom, opened my closet, pulled out my father's leather briefcase, and opened it for the first time in 10 years. The 1995 incorporation papers were still there. Raymond's 2003 notarized letter was still there. The deed to the Buckhead house was still there, with both our names clear as daylight. The SunTrust mortgage documents from 1995 were still there. 21 years of receipts, all in one briefcase, all in my name, all waiting. I closed the briefcase. I sat on the edge of my bed. I did not cry. I thought about my mother, scrubbing floors. I thought about my father, carving a desk. I thought about the Parker pen in my pocket, and the yellow house on Pine Street, and the day I signed away my mother's legacy to save my husband's dream. And then I thought about the 8-year-old boy I had taken in, the 9-year-old I had raised from a high fever, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost holy, that the boy I had loved was not the man who had written that letter. The man who had written that letter was a thief. I tried to handle it privately first. My mother raised me that way. On January 8th, 2024, I drove to Derek's office at Whitfield Properties headquarters in Midtown. 32nd floor, glass walls, the view of the city I had helped build from $47,000, and a mortgaged yellow house. I brought one folder, just one. Inside were copies, not originals, copies, of the 1995 incorporation papers and the joint deed to the Buckhead house. Derek was waiting. Ashley was there too, which told me everything I needed to know. When a man brings his wife to a conversation about his stepmother, it is not a family conversation. It is a negotiation. I sat down across from him. I slid the folder across the desk. Derek didn't open it. He looked at me with an expression I had seen once before, on a hospital patient who was about to lie to me about how much he'd had to drink. And he said, "Mama Clara, this is from 1995. Nobody cares about these old papers. Dad ran the company. You made sandwiches. I mean that with love. You kept the house. You kept us fed. Nobody is saying you didn't contribute, but let's not confuse contribution with ownership. Those are different things, legally. Ashley leaned forward, hand on Derek's arm, voice like honey over gravel. Clara, we want to take care of you. $200,000, plus a nice condo in a senior community. There's a beautiful one in Sandy Springs, we already toured it. And you sign a non-disclosure, and we all move on. This doesn't have to be ugly. You're 61. You don't need a mansion. You need peace. I looked at Ashley. I looked at Derek. I looked at the boy I had raised, sitting in a leather chair in an office on the 32nd floor, calling my life's work sandwiches. I said, Derek, when you were 9 years old, you had pneumonia so bad I thought you were going to die. I sat by your hospital bed for 3 nights. I counted every breath you took. Do you remember that? He blinked. Mama Clara, what does that have to do with... I want you to think about it, I said, because I want you to understand that I am the only person in this building who has ever counted your breaths. And I'm telling you right now, as calmly as I know how, take the folder, read the papers, and call me back by Friday with a real offer, or I will see you in court. He didn't call me back. He sent Brooks Whitaker another letter instead, informing me that Whitfield Properties LLC considered the matter closed and that any further communication would be handled through counsel. I drove to West End the next morning and walked into the office of Desmond Holloway, attorney at law, and I put the leather briefcase on his desk. He looked at the briefcase. He looked at me. He said, Mrs. Whitfield, what can I do for you? And I said the sentence I had been saving in my throat for 41 years. Mr. Holloway, my husband is dead. My stepson is a liar. And I am done being quiet. Desmond Holloway did not look like a man about to change my life. He looked like a man who had forgotten to eat breakfast. His tie was slightly crooked. There was a coffee ring on his desk that he didn't bother to hide when I sat down. The office was small. 1 window, 1 bookshelf, 3 framed diplomas that he clearly hadn't dusted in a while. And it smelled like old paper and the faint menthol of a throat lozenge someone had unwrapped that morning. I liked him immediately. My mother taught me never to trust a lawyer whose office was too clean. If he's got time to polish his desk, she used to say, he's not doing enough for his clients. Desmond's desk had not been polished in a long time. He pulled the leather briefcase toward him slowly, the way a surgeon lifts a patient's hand to check a pulse. He opened the clasps. He lifted out the 1995 incorporation papers first. He read them. He read them again. He set them down. Then he lifted out the 2003 letter. He read it. He took off his reading glasses. He set them on the desk. He looked up at me. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, do you know what you have here? I said, I know exactly what I have. Why haven't you used this? Because Raymond was alive, and I loved him. And love, Mr. Holloway, is not a weapon, not unless someone forces it to be. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a black ballpoint pen, and he said, start at the beginning. The yellow house in Macon. Tell me everything. I talked for 2 hours. He didn't interrupt once. When I was done, he set the pen down, leaned back in his chair, and said 3 sentences I will remember until the day I die. Mrs. Whitfield, they don't just owe you an apology. They owe you half a company, and I am going to get it for you. I said, I don't want half, Mr. Holloway. I want what's mine, and I want them to say my name in a room full of witnesses. He nodded slowly. He wrote that down on his legal pad, word for word. Then he underlined it twice. Then that, he said, is what we are going to do. They knew within 48 hours. That's how fast news travels in Atlanta, especially when the news is that a black woman has walked into a West End law office with a briefcase full of receipts. Somebody talked. Somebody always talks. I don't know if it was a paralegal or a secretary or a clerk at the Fulton County Records Office. One of Desmond's staff had pulled the original 1995 filing from the archives that same afternoon, and Derek's lawyers had people watching those archives like hawks. But by Thursday morning, Brooks Whitaker was calling Desmond's office every hour. Desmond wouldn't take the calls. He let them pile up on voicemail, and every evening he would forward them to me without comment. I listened to them in my car, in the driveway of the Buckhead house, before going inside. The first voicemail was professional. Mr. Holloway, we'd like to discuss a reasonable resolution. The second was less professional. Mr. Holloway, I think we both understand that public litigation would be embarrassing for all parties. The third was not professional at all. Mr. Holloway, my client is prepared to increase his offer significantly. But I'd remind you that Mrs. Whitfield is 61, grieving, and any testimony she gives under oath will be rigorously examined for coherence. Please advise her to consider that carefully. Desmond played that voicemail for me on a Friday afternoon, on speakerphone, in his office. When it ended, he turned to me and said very quietly, "Mrs. Whitfield, that is a threat. Do you understand that?" I said, "Mr. Holloway, I have been threatened by men in hospital gowns with gunshot wounds. I have been threatened by drunk drivers. I have been threatened by a supervisor at Grady who told me I would never make charge nurse because I didn't know my place. Brooks Whitaker does not frighten me. He sounds like a man with expensive shoes and a cheap soul." Desmond smiled for the first time since I had met him. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, "I am going to enjoy working for you." Derek called me himself on a Saturday night. It was the first time I had heard his voice since the meeting at his office. I was standing in my kitchen making tea, chamomile with a splash of honey, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Derek Whitfield. I almost didn't answer. My thumb hovered over the decline button for a full 3 seconds. Then I pressed accept, because I wanted to hear what he sounded like. "Mama Clara." His voice was softer than I remembered. "Please, can we talk? Just you and me. No lawyers." I said, "I'm listening." "I've been thinking. A lot. I was wrong to send you that letter. I was wrong about the condo. Ashley was wrong. We panicked. Dad's gone and everybody's grabbing for things, and I didn't handle it right. I want to fix this." He paused. I let him pause. $1.5 million, he said. "Cash. You keep the Buckhead house. We call it even. The company stays with me, you sign a non-disclosure, and we put this all behind us. Please, Mama Clara, for Dad. He wouldn't want this to go public. You know he wouldn't." I stood in my kitchen, holding a cup of chamomile tea, looking at a photograph on the refrigerator. It was from 1997, Derek's high school graduation. He had his arm around me. He was smiling. I was wearing a red dress Raymond had bought me for Mother's Day. Derek was 22 years old and still called me Mama Clara sometimes, when he forgot to be cool. I said, "Derek, you said something to me in your office last month. You said I made sandwiches. Do you remember that?" "Mama Clara, I didn't mean—" "You did mean it. You meant every word of it. And the thing about words, Derek, is they don't go back into your mouth. Once they're out, they're out. And I heard what you said about me in that office. And I heard what you didn't say at your father's funeral. And I heard Ashley offer to put me in a senior community in Sandy Springs like I was a stray cat she was trying to relocate. Mama, your father knew what I gave to that company. He knew because he was there. He wrote it down. He signed it. He had it notarized. And you, Derek, the boy I raised, decided to pretend none of it ever happened. That is not a mistake. That is not panic. That is a choice. And I am not going to sign a piece of paper that lets you pretend you didn't make it." Silence on the line. A long silence. Then Derek said very quietly, "Mama Clara, please don't do this. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're 61 years old. You don't want to be on the front page of the Journal-Constitution." I said, "Derek, I was on the front lines of Grady Memorial for 22 years. Nothing embarrasses me anymore. Good night." I hung up. I poured the tea down the sink. Chamomile had lost its taste. Then Ashley sent me a text message at 11:47 p.m. I still have the screenshot. Desmond still has the screenshot. "Don't embarrass the family, Clara. You know how this ends for black women suing rich families in Georgia. Derek is trying to help you. Don't make him regret it." I read it 3 times. I took the screenshot. I forwarded it to Desmond with one line, "Add this to the file." He wrote back in the morning, "Already added. She just handed us a gift." Word got around the family, the way it always does. My sister Vanessa called me from Macon on Monday. Vanessa is 3 years younger than me, a retired high school principal, and she has the kind of voice that can stop a middle school fistfight from 50 yards away. She did not waste words. "Clara May, is it true you're taking that boy to court?" I said, "It's true." She said, "About damn time." "You want me to drive up?" I said, "No, baby, not yet. When the trial starts." She said, "I'll be there the first day, front row, wearing my church hat. You hear me? That boy is going to see the whole Johnson family looking at him." I started to cry. Not sad crying, the other kind, the kind that happens when someone tells you they love you in the language your family uses. I said, "Vanessa, I love you." She said, "I know you do. Now pull yourself together and go whip that boy's behind in court." Simone was harder. Simone is Raymond's daughter and mine, and she carries a little bit of both of us, Raymond's caution and my stubbornness, and she had spent the first 2 weeks after Derek's letter trying to convince me to settle. Not because she didn't believe me, because she was afraid of what a public fight would do to the family, and because she had seen what Atlanta high society lawyers could do to older women on a witness stand. She came over on a Tuesday evening. She brought Thai food from the place on Ponce de Leon that Raymond used to love. We sat at the kitchen table and she opened the containers and she said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to not be angry with me." I said, "Ask." "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once you file, there's no going back. Derek is going to fight. Ashley is going to fight dirtier. The Blackwell firm is going to eat you alive on the stand. They're going to bring up every time you forgot a name or misplaced your keys. They're going to make you look old, Mom. And the jury is going to pity you, and pity is not the same thing as justice." I looked at my daughter across the table. I said, "Simone, when you were 4 years old, you asked me why you had different skin than your brother. Do you remember what I told you?" She shook her head. "I told you that your skin is the color of the coffee your father makes on Sunday mornings, and that it is the most beautiful color God ever invented, and that some people are going to try to make you feel small about it. And when they do, you have to remember who you are. You have to remember that your grandmother cleaned floors so your mother could go to college, and your mother counted breaths at Grady Memorial so you could go to Columbia Law, and that's not a debt. That's a line of women, and you're standing on it." She was already crying. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I am standing on that line right now, Simone. And if I sit down, if I take the money and sign the paper and let Derek rewrite what your father and I built, then the line stops with me. And I am not going to be the woman who stopped the line." She squeezed my hand. She said, "Okay, Mom," she said. "Okay, let's burn it down." I called Reverend Thomas Boyd at 2 a.m, 3 days before the trial. Thomas had been our pastor at First AME for 36 years. He had married Raymond and me in 1983. He had buried Raymond in November. He was 73 years old, widowed himself, and he still kept his phone by his bed because he said a pastor who didn't take 2 a.m. calls wasn't really a pastor. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was rough with sleep, but steady. "Clara, tell me." "Thomas, am I doing the right thing?" He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him moving, sitting up probably, finding his glasses, clearing his throat. "Clara, tell me what you're afraid of." "I'm afraid Raymond would be ashamed of me. He always said, 'Don't make a scene.' He said, 'Let the work speak.' He said the Lord sees what people don't. And I kept quiet for 41 years because I believed that. And now I'm about to walk into a courtroom and make the loudest scene of my life. And I don't know if he would want me to." Thomas sighed. It was the sigh of a man who had heard a lot of confessions in his time. "Clara," he said, "Raymond was my friend for 40 years. I loved that man. He was a good husband to you. He was a good father to both those children. And he was a coward about one thing. Exactly one thing. In the entire time I knew him. He let the world call his wife a housekeeper, and he didn't correct them, because it was easier for him not to." I couldn't breathe for a second. Thomas had never said anything like that to me before. "He knew what he was doing," Thomas continued. "He told me about it, Clara, years ago. He came to me in the sanctuary after a Wednesday service, and he said, 'Thomas, I let them call her the wrong thing for too long, and I don't know how to fix it.' And I told him then, in 2009, I remember the year, I told him, 'Raymond, you fix it by telling the truth out loud, starting right now.' And he said he would. And he didn't." I was crying now, real crying, the kind I hadn't done since the funeral. "But Clara," Thomas said, "he did try to fix it at the end. The will he signed in September, the real one that Desmond has, that was him trying. And what Derek did with that letter, contesting everything, erasing you again, that was not Raymond's doing, that was Derek's. And Raymond is not in that courtroom. Derek is. So you don't think I'm making a scene? Clara Mae Johnson Whitfield, listen to me. You are not making a scene. You are correcting a 41-year-old record. There is a difference. And Raymond, wherever he is pulling up a chair to watch." I laughed. I actually laughed, through the tears. Thomas said, "I'll be in the third row on the first day, wearing my robe, so that boy knows exactly who he's facing." I said, "Thomas, I love you." He said, "I love you too, baby. Go to sleep." I slept better that night than I had since November. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 5:45. I was in a room at the Candler Hotel in downtown Atlanta, 3 blocks from the courthouse. I had checked in 2 nights earlier to avoid any possibility of Derek's lawyers claiming I had violated some procedural nonsense about the Buckhead property. Desmond had insisted. I had agreed. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed for a long time before I stood up. The curtains were heavy, the kind that block out every bit of light, and the room felt like a cave, which was, I think, what I needed. A quiet, dark place to be afraid in private before walking into a room where I would not be allowed to be afraid at all. I prayed. Not for victory. My mother raised me not to pray for victory. God is not a slot machine, Clara May, but for the right words, for steady hands, for the strength to tell the truth plainly and let the truth do its own work. Then I got up. I took a hot shower. I dressed slowly. The gray blazer from Marshall's, the white blouse I had ironed the night before, a knee-length black skirt, and low black pumps. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would give Margaret Sterling ammunition to call me vain. I put on my mother's pearl earrings, which she had bought herself with her first paycheck from a big house in Vineville, and I put on a thin gold chain Raymond had given me for our 10th anniversary. And then I picked up the Parker pen. I slid it into the inside pocket of the blazer, over my heart. "For Daddy," I whispered. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. The woman looking back was 61 years old, gray at the temples, lines around the eyes, a small scar on her left eyebrow from a rough shift at Grady in 1994. A woman who had raised 2 children, buried a mother, buried a husband, and carried a leather briefcase through 30 years of other people's pride. I said out loud to the mirror, "You are not a maid. You are not a housekeeper. You are not confused. You are Clara May Johnson Whitfield, and you are going to walk into that room and tell the truth." Then I went downstairs for breakfast. I ate a piece of wheat toast and drank a cup of black coffee. My hands trembled when I lifted the cup. I let them tremble. There's no shame in trembling hands. Shame is in pretending you're not afraid. Shame is what Derek was going to feel later that day. I was not going to be ashamed for being human. Simone arrived at 7:15. She was wearing a dark gray suit and her hair pulled back, and she looked so much like her father in that moment that I almost had to sit down. She said, "You ready, Mom?" I said, 41 years of ready, baby." We drove to the courthouse in her rental car. We did not speak. She held my hand at every red light. The courthouse steps were already crowded. It wasn't a media circus. Atlanta has bigger fish. But the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had picked up the story a week earlier, and there was a local reporter with a camera standing near the front entrance, and 2 or 3 curious onlookers who had seen the headline and wanted a look. The headline had been, "Widow sues Stepson over $78 million real estate empire, claims founding partnership." The subhead had been worse. "Whitfield Properties heir calls claim confused grief, promises vigorous defense." I saw Derek before he saw me. He was standing near the front of the steps, talking to the reporter. His lawyer, Margaret Sterling, was beside him, pretending not to listen, but listening to every word. Derek had his hands spread in that open-palmed gesture politicians use when they're lying gracefully. I heard him say as we walked up, "This is a sad case, really. An elderly woman, confused by grief, misled by opportunistic counsel. We're still family. We'll take care of her. That's what my father would have wanted." The reporter asked, "Sir, can you comment on the 1995 incorporation documents that name Mrs. Whitfield as a 49% owner?" Derek smiled the smile I had seen him use at age 15 when he got caught lying about a broken window. "Those documents are being reviewed, but let me be clear. That partnership structure was purely ceremonial. It was a way for my father to include his wife symbolically. It was never operational." Ceremonial. He called 30 years of my life ceremonial. Our eyes met. Derek saw me. His smile flickered, just for a half second, just enough. And then he recovered and gave me a small, polite nod, like I was an old neighbor passing on the sidewalk. I did not smile back. I did not nod. I simply looked at him. I looked at him the way my mother used to look at people who had just lied to her face. A long, steady, patient look that said, "I see you. I have always seen you. And you are about to be seen by everyone else." He looked away first. Simone whispered, "Mom, Come on, inside." We went through the metal detectors. Desmond was waiting in the lobby with his briefcase and a small, nervous-looking paralegal named Jamal. He took one look at me, nodded once, and said, "Mrs. Whitfield, you look ready." I said, "Mr. Holloway, I have been ready for 41 years. Let's go to work." We took the elevator to the 4th floor. Courtroom 4B. When the elevator doors opened, Desmond leaned over and said one last thing to me. "Mrs. Whitfield, remember, the most powerful thing in that room today is not anger. It is not tears. It is calm. The calmer you are, the louder the truth becomes." I touched the Parker pen in my pocket. I said, "Mr. Holloway, I have been calm for 41 years. I am not about to change now." Margaret Sterling stood up at 9:06 on the dot. She was a tall woman, 58 years old, white, blonde in that expensive way that costs $600 a visit, wearing a charcoal suit that fit her the way a scabbard fits a knife. She walked to the front of the courtroom with the confidence of a woman who had been winning cases since 1994 and saw no reason to stop now. She turned to the jury. 12 ordinary people from Fulton County, 6 men, 6 women, 7 black, 4 white, 1 Hispanic, ages ranging from 28 to 71. I had counted them carefully during jury selection. Desmond had told me the jury pool in Fulton County tended to lean in our favor, but that Margaret was an expert at peeling off the older white women. 2 of them were sitting in the back row now, looking at Margaret with polite attention. Margaret began, "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we have before us today is a tragedy, not the tragedy my opposing counsel would have you believe. The tragedy of a grieving widow, 61 years old, who spent nearly 4 decades as the loving, supportive homemaker of a remarkable man, and who now, in her grief, has been persuaded by opportunistic legal counsel that she was something more than she was." She paused. She walked slowly, letting the words settle. "Mrs. Whitfield, and we mean no disrespect to her, we truly don't, was a devoted wife. She was a devoted stepmother. She kept a beautiful home. She supported her husband's dreams. These are noble things. These are important things. But ladies and gentlemen, supporting a dream and owning a company are 2 different things. Making dinner and signing operational agreements are 2 different things. We are here today because Mrs. Whitfield, in the fog of her grief, has confused the 2. She turned slightly, just enough to gesture toward me without looking directly at me. "Over the next 2 days, you will hear testimony from 3 witnesses who worked inside Whitfield Properties for years. They will tell you that Mrs. Whitfield never attended a single board meeting after 2005. She never signed an operational email. She was never introduced to an investor as a co-founder. She was never listed on the company website. She was, by every practical measure, a homemaker, and we honor that role. But we must not, allow grief to rewrite corporate history." A juror in the front row, an older white woman with a cross around her neck, nodded slowly. Desmond leaned toward me. He whispered, "Let her build it. The higher she climbs, the harder the fall." I nodded. I did not take my eyes off Margaret. She concluded, "Mr. Raymond Whitfield was a self-made man. He built Whitfield Properties from a single rental unit into a $78 million real estate portfolio. He was a remarkable businessman. He loved his wife, and he provided for her generously. But he built his company, not her. And today we ask you to protect his legacy from being rewritten by lawyers who see an opportunity and a widow who has been told she was something she was not. Thank you." She sat down. The older white woman on the jury nodded again. Desmond stood. He did not walk to the front. He stood behind our table and spoke from there, slowly, quietly, without any of Margaret's theater. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Sterling just told you that my client is confused by grief. I want you to look at my client. Look at her face. Look at her hands. Look at the way she is sitting. Does she look confused to you?" 12 heads turned toward me. I did not move. I did not smile. I did not look down. I looked at each of them, one at a time, the way I used to look at scared patients in the ER who needed to see a steady face. 2 of the jurors nodded back at me slightly. The older white woman with the cross looked away. Desmond continued, "Over the course of this trial, we are going to show you documents, not opinions, not memories, not emotional claims. Documents, signed, notarized, filed with the state of Georgia. We are going to show you an incorporation agreement from August 14th, 1995, in which Mrs. Clara Whitfield is named a 49% owner of Whitfield Properties, LLC. We are going to show you a mortgage from SunTrust Bank dated July 1995, in which Mrs. Whitfield mortgaged her mother's family home to generate the $47,000 seed capital that founded this company. We are going to show you a notarized letter signed by Raymond Whitfield himself in 2003, in which he affirms, in his own handwriting, that without his wife's contributions, the company would not exist. Margaret shifted in her chair. Derek stared straight ahead. Mrs. Sterling called my client confused. My client is not confused. My client is patient. For 41 years, she allowed a man she loved to stand in the spotlight. She did not ask for credit. She did not ask for a website listing. She did not ask for her name on a board meeting invitation. She built a company, quietly, the way Black women in the South have built things quietly for a very long time. And when her husband died, and her stepson attempted to erase her, not just from the company, but from the house she co-owned, from the legacy she built, she finally did what she should have done decades ago. She opened a briefcase, and she brought the receipts. A murmur ran through the gallery. Judge Holloman did not silence it. Desmond sat down. Judge Holloman said, "Counsel, call your first witness." Margaret stood. The defense calls Trevor Lindgren. Trevor Lindgren was 39 years old, the current chief financial officer of Whitfield Properties, a man Derek had personally hired in 2013 and promoted to CFO in 2019. He was white, slightly soft around the middle, wore a good suit. He walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who had been rehearsed carefully. Margaret walked him through his background. 11 years at the company, Harvard MBA, former analyst at Goldman Sachs. A man, in other words, whose resume was designed to make jurors lean forward. Then she got to the heart of it. Mr. Lindgren, during your 11 years at Whitfield Properties, did you ever interact with Mrs. Clara Whitfield in a business capacity? Never? Never once? Not once. I met her socially a few times, at the company Christmas party, at Mr. Whitfield's 60th birthday dinner. She was always very pleasant, but she had no role in operations during my tenure. Did she attend board meetings? No. Did she sign operational documents? No. Did anyone at the company, in your 11 years, ever refer to her as a co-founder? No. She was always referred to as Mr. Whitfield's wife. Margaret turned to the jury. Thank you. No further questions. Desmond stood up slowly. He did not approach the witness. He stood behind our table, hands in his pockets. Mr. Lindgren, you joined Whitfield Properties in 2013, correct? Yes. So you were not present at the company's founding in 1995, correct? You were not present during the 2003 financial crisis that nearly bankrupted the company. No. You were not present during the first 18 years of this company's operation, when the core partnership was actively running the business. That's correct, yes. So when you tell this jury that Mrs. Whitfield was not a co-founder, you are basing that statement on a period that began 18 years after the company was founded. Is that accurate? Trevor Lindgren paused. Yes, based on my direct experience, yes. And did Mr. Raymond Whitfield ever, in your presence, specifically tell you, my wife is not a co-founder of this company? He didn't phrase it that way, no. Did he ever, in your 11 years, explain to you how Whitfield Properties was originally funded in 1995? We never discussed the founding capital. So you do not know where the original $47,000 came from? No, I don't. Thank you, Mr. Lindgren. No further questions. Desmond sat down. He did not look at the jury. He did not need to. I watched the older white woman with the cross in the front row. She was no longer nodding. Margaret called Ashley Whitfield next. Ashley walked up to the stand in a navy dress she had clearly chosen specifically to look younger and more sympathetic than she actually was. She took the oath with both hands on her purse, and she answered Margaret's opening questions in a voice an octave higher than the one she had used to text me at 11:47 p.m. Margaret asked her about her relationship with Raymond. Ashley said she had known him for 7 years, since she started dating Derek in 2016. She said Raymond had been like a father to her. Margaret asked, Mrs. Whitfield, and forgive the shared last name, did your father-in-law ever discuss the company's ownership with you? Yes, many times. What did he tell you? Ashley's voice trembled just a little. It was a good performance. He told me that Clara was his rock. He loved her very much. but he told me specifically that the business was his. He said, and I'll never forget this, he said, Ashley, Clara is my heart, but the company is my life's work. She dabbed her eye with a tissue. Margaret looked grave. Thank you. No further questions. Desmond stood up. He took a slow breath. Then he walked, for the first time all morning, toward the witness stand. Mrs. Whitfield, you married Derek in 2018, correct? Yes. And Mr. Raymond Whitfield passed away in November of 2023. Yes. So the entirety of your personal knowledge of Raymond and Clara's marriage spans approximately 7 years. Yes, but thank you. Please just answer the questions. Your personal knowledge of a 40-year marriage is limited to the final 7 years. That's yes. And during those 7 years, Mr. Raymond Whitfield was, by all accounts, in the final chapter of his life. He was semi-retired. He was not actively founding a company. He had already founded it nearly 3 decades earlier. Correct. So when you tell this jury that Raymond said the business is my life's work, you were hearing those words from a man at the end of his career, reflecting on decades of history. History you were not present for. I suppose, but he... Mrs. Whitfield, do you know what my client did in April of 2003? I don't know what you mean. Do you know what she did during the company's near bankruptcy? Ashley glanced at Derek. Derek was staring at the table. No, I don't know the specifics. Have you ever heard the phrase, she mortgaged her nursing pension to save the company? Objection! Margaret was on her feet. Assumes facts not in evidence. Judge Holloman said, Mr. Holloway? Desmond nodded. Withdrawn, Your Honor, for now. He turned back to Ashley. One last question, Mrs. Whitfield. On the evening of January 11th of this year, did you send my client a text message that read, and I quote, Don't embarrass the family, Clara. You know how this ends for black women suing rich families in Georgia? The courtroom went dead silent. Ashley went pale. That was out of context. Yes or no, Mrs. Whitfield? Did you send that text message? Yes, but thank you. No further questions. Desmond walked back to our table. As he sat down, I saw the older white woman with the cross staring at Ashley with an expression that could have frozen water. Judge Holloman said, We'll break for lunch, back at 1:30. She struck the gavel. Desmond and I went to a small conference room down the hall. He closed the door. He sat down across from me. He exhaled like a man who had been holding his breath for 3 hours. He said, Mrs. Whitfield, they're playing the helpless widow card hard, and it's working on at least 2 jurors. Did you see the older woman in the front row and the man in the third seat? We've stabilized the room, but we haven't turned it. Not yet. I said, Mr. Holloway, open the briefcase. He looked at me. I said, there's something I haven't shown you yet. I lifted my father's briefcase onto the table. I opened it. I moved aside the 1995 incorporation papers, the 2003 letter, the Buckhead deed, the SunTrust mortgage, the nursing pension wire transfer. And from the very bottom, underneath all of it, I pulled out a sealed manila envelope. I had not opened it in 6 months. On the front, in Raymond's handwriting, was one line, For Clara, in case our son forgets who he is. Desmond stared at the envelope. He stared at me. He said very quietly, Mrs. Whitfield, what is inside that envelope? I said, Mr. Holloway, this afternoon they are going to find out. I did not eat lunch. Desmond brought me a turkey sandwich from the cafeteria on the first floor, wrapped in wax paper, along with a small carton of orange juice. I held the sandwich in my hand for about 4 minutes. I set it back down. I drank half the orange juice. My stomach was a closed fist. Simone was on her phone in the corner of the conference room, talking quietly to Vanessa, who had driven up from Macon that morning and was now sitting in the 3rd row of the courtroom, wearing a wide-brimmed cream-colored hat my mother would have called a statement of intentions. Reverend Boyd was beside her in his clerical collar. They had taken the 2 seats directly behind me, and I had felt them there all morning, the way a child feels a parent watching from the kitchen doorway. Desmond sat across from me with the sealed envelope between us. He had not opened it. He was waiting for me to give him permission. I said, Mr. Holloway, I want to tell you what's in it before you see it, because I want you to understand why I waited this long. He set his pen down. He folded his hands. He said, Take your time, Mrs. Whitfield. I took a breath. In September of last year, about 6 weeks before Raymond died, he came home from a doctor's appointment and sat in the sunroom for a long time without speaking. I knew something was wrong. I didn't push. Raymond was the kind of man who needed to walk around a thought for a while before he could hand it to you. Around 7 that evening, he came into the kitchen where I was making dinner, and he said, "Clara, I need to go see Benjamin Rosenthal tomorrow, by myself. I'll tell you when I get back." Desmond was still. The next day, he went to Rosenthal's office. He came back around 4 in the afternoon with a thick envelope under his arm. He went straight up to the study. I heard him on the phone with Rosenthal for about an hour. Then he came downstairs, sat on the couch next to me, put the envelope on the coffee table, and said, "Clara, I've been a coward. I've been a coward my whole life about one thing, and I'm tired of it. This is my new will, the real one. And I want you to put it somewhere Derek will never find it, because if he finds it before the right time, he'll contest it, and it won't matter what I wrote." Desmond's eyes did not leave my face. I asked Raymond what was in it. He said, "Everything I should have said out loud for 30 years. I'm giving you the company. I'm giving you the house. I'm giving Derek the watch, the boat, and my love. And I'm adding a clause that if he contests any of it, he loses even the watch and the boat." I told him, "Raymond, that's going to destroy him." And Raymond said, and I will never forget this, Mr. Holloway, he said, "Clara, it might, but if it does, it'll be because he chose to. I am not going to leave this world having built a man who thinks you are less than what you are." Desmond exhaled very slowly. He died 6 weeks later. I put the envelope at the bottom of the briefcase. I never told Simone. I never told Vanessa. I never told Thomas. I didn't even tell Derek's lawyers when they sent me that first letter, because I wanted to see what Derek would do. I wanted to see if he would come to me honestly, or if he would try to take everything. If he had come to me honestly, if he had even once said, "Mama Clara, I don't know what Dad left behind, but let's figure it out together," I would have given him the envelope myself. I would have. I swear to you on my mother's grave, I would have, Desmond said quietly. But he didn't. No, he didn't. So the envelope has been sitting in the briefcase, and Derek has been writing his own story about his father, and now we are going to read the real one out loud. Desmond sat back in his chair. He said, "Mrs. Whitfield, do you understand what this means for the trial?" I said yes. "It means the ownership question we're fighting about this afternoon, the 49%, is actually the smaller question. The bigger question is that Raymond left me 100% of the company, and Derek has been contesting a will he doesn't even know exists, which triggers a clause that strips him of what little his father did leave him." Desmond said, "Mrs. Whitfield, you are a dangerous woman." I said, "No, Mr. Holloway, I am a patient one. There is a difference." He opened the envelope. At 1:30 we returned to courtroom 4B. Derek was already seated. He did not look at me. Ashley was beside him, dabbing her eye with a fresh tissue, though I did not see any tears on her face. Margaret Sterling was reviewing her notes with the careful confidence of a woman who still thought she was winning. Judge Holloman entered. We stood. We sat. She nodded at Desmond. "Mr. Holloway, call your first witness." Desmond stood. He buttoned his jacket, and he said with a small, almost imperceptible smile, "Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Eleanor Bradford." Margaret Sterling's head snapped up. I watched her face. I watched her look at Derek. I watched Derek turn to her and mouth, "Who?" Eleanor Bradford walked into the courtroom slowly, leaning on a brass-handled cane, in a pale blue cardigan and sensible shoes. She was 74 years old, thin as a reed, with hair the color of steel wool, and the steady, unimpressed eyes of a woman who had balanced a ledger every Friday afternoon for 46 years. She had not aged so much as concentrated. All the soft parts had been burned away, and what was left was just bone and honesty. She walked past Derek on her way to the witness stand. Derek stared at her like a man seeing a ghost. She did not look at him. She did not turn her head a single degree. She walked past him the way a woman walks past a man who owes her an apology he is never going to give, and she took her seat, and she raised her right hand for the oath, and she spoke the words clearly, without tremor. Margaret Sterling rose halfway. "Your Honor, we object. This witness was not," Judge Holloman said. "Mrs. Bradford was listed in the plaintiff's supplemental witness filing on February 17th, Ms. Sterling. You were served. Sit down." Margaret sat down. Desmond approached the stand. "Mrs. Bradford, would you please state your full name and occupation for the record?" "Eleanor Margaret Bradford. I am retired. I live in Savannah, Georgia now." "Prior to your retirement, where were you employed?" I was the staff accountant for Whitfield Properties LLC from January of 1995 until my retirement in August of 2012. 17 years and 7 months. Mrs. Bradford, in those 17 years, how often did you interact with Mrs. Clara Whitfield on company business? Eleanor looked directly at the jury. Every single week, sir. Every Friday afternoon from 2 to 4, without fail, Mrs. Whitfield came into my office on Ponce de Leon Avenue and reviewed the books with me. We reconciled the accounts, we went over tenant receivables, we signed off on vendor payments, and we approved the payroll. Every Friday, for 17 years. I kept the calendar. I still have it. It is in the folder my attorney brought this morning. Desmond said, Your Honor, we would like to enter Mrs. Bradford's original desk calendars from 1995 through 2012 into evidence as Plaintiff's Exhibits B through S. Judge Holloman said, Admitted. 18 small spiral-bound calendars, each with CW 2 to 4 p.m., written in Eleanor's cramped handwriting every single Friday of every single year, were passed one by one to the jury. A juror, a young black man in his early 30s, third row, whistled softly under his breath. Judge Holloman did not reprimand him. Desmond continued. Mrs. Bradford, during your 17 years, did any major financial decision exceeding $50,000 ever occur without Mrs. Whitfield's signature? Not one. Did any of those decisions ever occur with only Mr. Raymond Whitfield's signature? No. The operating agreement required both signatures over $50,000. Raymond was very strict about that. He told me once, I remember the exact conversation, it was 1998. He said, Eleanor, this company has 2 bosses, and if anyone ever tries to tell you otherwise, you show them the agreement. Mrs. Bradford, do you have personal knowledge of the funding that started this company in 1995? Eleanor turned to the jury. Her voice was quiet but clear. I was the one who deposited the cashier's check. July 21st, 1995. $47,000 from SunTrust Bank of Macon, drawn against a mortgage on a property on Pine Street. The check was endorsed by Mrs. Clara Johnson Whitfield. I have the deposit slip. It is also in the folder. Another exhibit. Another silence from the jury. And do you have personal knowledge of the financial rescue in April of 2003? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears for the first time. She did not let them fall, but they were there. Yes, sir. I was in the office the morning Mrs. Whitfield wired $180,000 from her personal nursing pension into the company operating account. Mr. Whitfield sat in my office afterward and cried. He was a grown man, and he put his head on my desk, and he cried for about 20 minutes, and then he picked his head up and said to me, and I am going to quote him exactly, because I wrote it down that night in my personal journal, which I also brought today. He said, Eleanor, she saved us. She has always saved us. And I don't know how to make the world see her the way I do. She paused. She took a breath. I said to him, Raymond, you could start by telling the world. And he said, I know I could. And I will. One day, I will. She looked past Desmond. She looked past me. She looked directly at Derek. He didn't do it. Not while he was alive. So I am doing it for him today. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning rattle. Margaret Sterling stood for cross-examination. Her voice was tight. Mrs. Bradford, you are 74 years old. Is your memory— Eleanor cut her off. She did not raise her voice. She simply said, Ms. Sterling, my memory is sharper than your client's gratitude. I have been balancing books since 1968. I brought the originals. Would you like to review them? The older white woman with the cross in the front row laughed. She actually laughed, a short, surprised, delighted laugh, and then clapped her hand over her mouth like a woman at a church service who had just heard something she shouldn't have enjoyed. Judge Holloman said, Do you have further questions for this witness, Ms. Sterling? Margaret Sterling said, No further questions, Your Honor. She sat down. Desmond said, The witness is excused. Thank you, Mrs. Bradford. Eleanor Bradford stood slowly. She walked past Derek's table. This time she did turn her head. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. She did not say a word. She simply looked. Then she walked out of the courtroom with her cane tapping steady on the floor, and the sound of it was the only sound in the room for a long moment after the door closed behind her. Desmond said, Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit D for admission. The 2003 notarized letter. Margaret Sterling was on her feet. Your Honor, This document was never disclosed in discovery. We object strenuously, Desmond said. Your Honor, this document was never in the possession of the defendant or the company. It was a personal document held by my client, disclosed in our supplemental production on February 27th, with full chain of custody certified by the notary of record, Ms. Eloise Perkins of Bank of America, who has provided a sworn affidavit dated March 3rd. Judge Holloman read the letter. She read it twice. She looked at Margaret over the top of her glasses. Admitted. The letter was handed to the jury foreperson, who was a 68-year-old black woman named Mrs. Thelma Green, retired from Delta Airlines. She put on her reading glasses. She read it. She passed it to the juror beside her. It traveled slowly down the line, 12 pairs of hands, 12 pairs of eyes. I watched the older white woman with the cross read it. Her lips moved slightly as she read. When she finished, she folded the paper along its original crease, passed it to the juror on her left, and then took off her reading glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes for a long moment. Desmond turned slightly toward our table. He said just loud enough for me to hear. And now the email. Desmond said, Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit E, an email sent from Mr. Raymond Whitfield to Mr. Derek Whitfield on April 22, 2019, from Mr. Raymond Whitfield's personal computer, recovered from the home office of the decedent with full forensic authentication by Holmes Digital Forensics of Atlanta. Margaret Sterling stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Your Honor, we have not seen, Desmond said. Your Honor, this email was produced in our third supplemental disclosure on March 11th. Ms. Sterling's office acknowledged receipt via return email on March 12th at 10:47 a.m. I have the confirmation. Judge Holloman said, Sit down, Ms. Sterling. Margaret sat down. Desmond turned to the jury. He held up the printed email. He said, I am going to read this aloud. It is one paragraph. It is dated April 22, 2019. It is from Raymond W. at WhitfieldProperties.com to Derek W. at WhitfieldProperties.com. The subject line is 3 words. Stop it now. He read, Derek, I am hearing from 3 different people this month that you referred to Clara as the housekeeper in front of the Morehouse investors. Stop it. Today. She owns 49% of this company. She earned that stake before you were old enough to read. She mortgaged her mother's house so I could buy the first property. She sold her nursing pension so we could survive 2003. If anything ever happens to me, I want your word right now, in writing, that you will treat her as my equal, not my dependent, and that you will correct anyone, including yourself, who says otherwise. This is not a request. This is the condition on which you remain in this company. Your father, R.W. Desmond lowered the page. The courtroom did not move. Derek's face was the color of old paper. Ashley reached for his arm. He pulled it away. Mrs. Thelma Green, foreperson of the jury, was looking at Derek with the expression of a grandmother who has just caught a grown man lying to her face about something small and unforgivable. The older white woman with the cross was no longer looking at Margaret Sterling. She was looking at me. Desmond said, Your Honor, the plaintiff offers Exhibit E into evidence. Judge Holloman said, Admitted. Margaret Sterling did not object. She sat very still, the way people sit when the ground has shifted and they are waiting to see whether the building is going to fall. Desmond turned. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls Clara Mae Johnson Whitfield. My stomach dropped. I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. And still, for a half second, my knees did not want to move. Then Simone pressed her palm against my lower back, just once, and I stood up. I walked to the witness stand. I sat down. I raised my right hand. I took the oath. I placed my hands in my lap, fingers laced, the way my mother taught me to sit in church. I looked at the jury. I did not look at Derek. Desmond asked me 3 questions. He asked my full name. He asked my age. He asked how long I had been married to Raymond Whitfield. Then he sat down and left me to Margaret Sterling. Margaret Sterling rose. She straightened her jacket. She walked toward the witness stand slowly, the way a person walks toward a horse they are not sure will let them touch it. She said, Mrs. Whitfield, good afternoon. I said, Good afternoon. Mrs. Whitfield, you heard Mr. Lindgren testify this morning that he never saw you attend a single board meeting of Whitfield Properties during his 11 years at the company, correct? I did hear him, yes. Is he lying? No. He is telling the truth as he knows it. So you did not attend board meetings after 2005. I attended every meeting that mattered. I just was not on the formal agenda. Can you explain that answer to the jury? I turned toward the 12 of them. By 2005, Raymond and I had been married 22 years, and we had been running the company together for 10. We ran it from our kitchen table, ma'am. We ran it on Sunday afternoons, on Monday mornings, during his commute, during my grocery runs. The formal board meetings in the conference room were for investors and for show. The actual meetings were at home, and I was at every one of them, because I lived there, because I was his wife, and because I owned half of what we were talking about. Margaret pressed on. Mrs. Whitfield, do you hold an MBA? No. A degree in business, finance, or real estate? No, ma'am. A professional license of any kind in the real estate industry? No. So you have no formal training in the field in which you are now claiming co-founder status. I have a nursing degree from Fort Valley State University, ma'am, and I have 22 years of experience at Grady Memorial Hospital watching people lie on gurneys. I know when a man is telling the truth. Raymond told me the truth. His son is not. A soft sound from the jury box. Not laughter, something quieter. Recognition. Margaret's jaw tightened. She changed tactics. She walked slowly toward me, voice softer now, almost kind. Mrs. Whitfield, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is it possible that you are pursuing this lawsuit because you are lonely? Because your husband is gone and your life has changed and you want attention? Because the role of a grieving widow is a hard one, and a courtroom gives you a stage you no longer have at home? The courtroom held its breath. I looked at Margaret Sterling for a long moment. I looked at her expensive suit, and her blonde hair, and her wedding ring, and her tired, intelligent eyes. The eyes of a woman who had built a career on making other women feel small in rooms like this one. And then I turned to the jury. I said, Ms. Sterling, I spent 22 years wiping blood off emergency room floors at Grady Memorial Hospital in downtown Atlanta. I have held the hands of men who were dying while their families were still driving in from out of town. I have counted the breaths of a 9-year-old boy with pneumonia for 3 nights straight because his mother had left him, and I was the one who stayed. I have mortgaged my mother's house, and I have emptied my pension, and I have painted rental units in overalls on the weekends while my husband took meetings downtown in a suit. I paused. I did not raise my voice. I have raised 2 children, buried my mother, buried my husband, and carried a leather briefcase through 30 years of other people's pride. I am not lonely, Ms. Sterling. I am awake. There is a difference, and you know there is. The older white woman with the cross pressed her fingers against her mouth. I did not come here for attention. I do not want a stage. I have a house with a porch and a garden and a pen my father gave me in 1980, and that is enough of a stage for the rest of my life. I came here because my name is on a document that was signed in 1995, and no amount of expensive lawyers can unsign it. I came here because my husband spent 6 weeks before he died writing a letter he was too afraid to write 30 years ago, and he trusted me to read it in the room he could not be in. I came here because for 41 years I let the world call me the wrong thing, and somewhere along the way I raised a son who believed them. And I came here to tell him, in front of witnesses, that he was wrong. I turned. I looked directly at Derek for the first time since I had walked into the courtroom that morning. He was looking back at me. His eyes were wet. I said softly, Derek, you were my boy. You were my boy for many years. I counted your breaths when you were 9. I watched you graduate high school. I watched you graduate college. I watched you become a man. And the day you stood in that pulpit at your father's funeral and refused to say my name, that was the day you chose this room. Not me. You. I turned back to the jury. Ms. Sterling asked me if I am lonely. I am not. I am a woman who has been quiet for a long time and who is now finally speaking. That is not loneliness. That is a Tuesday afternoon in March. Thank you. Silence. Margaret Sterling said very quietly, No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Holloman said, You may step down, Mrs. Whitfield. I stood. My legs were steady. I walked past Derek's table. I did not look at him. I sat down beside Simone. She was crying silently, tears sliding down her face without a sound. She did not wipe them. She reached for my hand and she held it, and we sat like that for a long time while the afternoon light came sideways through the courtroom windows. Desmond stood. He said, "Your Honor, the plaintiff has one final exhibit." He held up a thick manila envelope, Raymond's handwriting visible on the front. "This is the last will and testament of Raymond Whitfield, executed on September 14, 2023, and notarized by Mr. Benjamin Rosenthal of Rosenthal and Partners. This will supersede any prior testamentary document. It has been in the sealed possession of my client since the date of execution. We offer it now, Your Honor, as Plaintiff's Exhibit F." Margaret Sterling stood up. She said, "Your Honor, we request a sidebar." Judge Holloman said, "Denied." "Sit down, Ms. Sterling. Mr. Holloway, please read the relevant portion into the record." Desmond opened the envelope. He unfolded the document. He read slowly, clearly. "Being of sound mind, this is the last will and testament of Raymond Whitfield, superseding all prior documents. To my beloved wife, Clara May Johnson Whitfield, I leave the following: my full ownership interest in Whitfield Properties, LLC, the property at 1847 Habersham Road in Buckhead, Atlanta, Georgia, and all personal accounts held jointly or solely in my name. To my son, Derek Raymond Whitfield, I leave my Rolex Submariner watch, my Grady 28-foot fishing boat currently moored at Lake Lanier, and a trust of $400,000 to be administered at his 40th birthday, which he has now passed. To my daughter, Simone Whitfield, I leave my vintage book collection and my father's wedding ring for her future use. This will contains a no contest clause. Any beneficiary who contests any portion of this will shall forfeit all bequests under this will. Signed this 14th day of September, 2023. Raymond Whitfield." Desmond lowered the page. "Your Honor, my client's stepson, Mr. Derek Whitfield, has been actively contesting the ownership and property provisions of this will, through counsel, in writing, in pleadings, and in his testimony adjacent statements to the press on the steps of this courthouse this very morning. Under the no contest clause, Mr. Derek Whitfield has forfeited the watch, the boat, and the $400,000 trust." The sound that came out of Derek Whitfield was not quite a word. It was the sound of a man who had just been told his house was on fire and he had lit the match himself. Ashley's purse slid off her lap onto the floor. She did not pick it up. Margaret Sterling sat very still, looking down at the table, the way a gambler looks at a hand that has gone completely cold. Judge Holloman said, "The will is admitted. Ms. Sterling, do you wish to present any additional evidence or witnesses this afternoon?" Margaret said, "No, Your Honor." Judge Holloman said, "Closing arguments at 4. Court is in brief recess." The jury was out for 4 hours and 11 minutes. Desmond, Simone, and I waited in the conference room. I did not eat. Simone drank coffee. Desmond read the newspaper and did not actually read it. Vanessa came in at one point and held my face in her hands and said, "Baby, whatever they decide, you already won the moment you stopped being quiet." I believed her. At 6:42 p.m., the bailiff knocked on the door. We filed back into courtroom 4B. The gallery was fuller than it had been in the morning. Word had traveled, and a few more reporters had shown up, and there were several people I did not recognize in the back. Older black women mostly, who had come simply to watch. Reverend Boyd was still in the 3rd row. Vanessa was beside him. Mrs. Thelma Green, foreperson, stood up. Judge Holloman asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Mrs. Green said, "We have, Your Honor." She read from a sheet of paper. Her voice was steady and a little proud. "On the count of breach of partnership agreement, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Clara May Johnson Whitfield. We affirm that Mrs. Whitfield is and has always been the legal 49% owner of Whitfield Properties, LLC. On the count of fraudulent misappropriation of distributions following the death of Mr. Raymond Whitfield in November 2023, we find in favor of the plaintiff and order the defendant, Derek Raymond Whitfield, to repay the sum of $2,100,000 to the company. On the count of contested property ownership at 1847 Habersham Road, we find in favor of the plaintiff. The property is and has always been the lawful residence of Mrs. Whitfield. On the probate validity of the will of Mr. Raymond Whitfield dated September 14, 2023, we affirm the will in its entirety, including the no contest clause." Mrs. Green lowered the paper. She looked up. She looked at me for a moment, and then she nodded once. I felt my body release something I had not realized I was holding. Not victory, not joy, not even relief exactly, just release. The way a woman feels when she finally sets down a heavy bag she has been carrying so long she forgot it was heavy. I did not cry. I did not smile. I touched the Parker pen over my heart, and I whispered just to myself, just loud enough for Raymond if he was listening. "Thank you." Derek caught me in the hallway. The reporters had rushed the front entrance, so Desmond led Simone and me out through a side corridor, past the jury room, toward a staff elevator. We were almost there when I heard footsteps behind us. "Mama Clara!" His voice was shaking. I stopped. I turned. Simone started to step between us. I put my hand on her arm. "It's all right, baby. Let him speak." Derek stopped about 6 feet away from me. His tie was loose. His eyes were red. Ashley was not with him. He said, "Mama Clara, please. I know what I did. I know what I said. I know what this looks like. But I'm your son. I've always been your son. Please, can we talk?" I looked at him for a long moment. I saw the 9-year-old with pneumonia. I saw the 16-year-old who first called me Clara. I saw the 22-year-old on graduation day with his arm around me in the red dress. I saw the man in the Rolex calling my life sandwiches. I saw all of him, the whole boy and the whole man, standing in a courthouse hallway at 7 in the evening, asking me to undo what he had done. I said, "Derek, come here." He stepped closer, slowly, like a child approaching a dog he had hit. I reached up. I put my hand on his cheek. I held it there for about 3 seconds. Then I took my hand back. I said, "Derek, when you were 9 years old, you had pneumonia so bad the doctors were worried. I sat by your bed for 3 nights and I counted your breaths. Today, in that courtroom, you tried to count me out. And that is not the same thing as a mistake. That is a choice you made. You were 49 years old, not 9. You had lawyers. You had time. You had options. And you chose this." He was crying now. Real tears, not performance. "Mama Clara, please." "I forgive you, Derek. I want you to hear me say that. I forgive you. Because my mother raised me not to carry a grudge into my grave. But forgiveness is not the same thing as closeness. And closeness is not the same thing as trust. I will pray for you. I will pray for your marriage. I will pray for the life you build from here. But I am not going to pretend the last 4 months did not happen. I am not going to pretend I did not hear what you said about me. I am not going to pretend you did not stand in front of reporters this morning and call me confused." "Mama, Derek, we are not the same family anymore. That is a thing you did, not me. And one day, when you are ready to be honest about that, really, truly honest, without lawyers and without shame, you can write me a letter. I will read it. I will keep it. But I am not going to sit across from you at a Thanksgiving table next month and pretend. Because I have pretended for 41 years and I am done." I stepped back. Simone took my arm. Derek stood alone in the hallway as we walked toward the elevator. Just before the doors closed, I looked back. He was still standing there. He was a grown man, and he was crying, and I did not turn away. The doors closed. Simone said softly, "Mom." I said, "I know, baby. I know. I did not cry until we got to the car. I did not take everything. That is important to me. I want you to understand this part, because it is the part most people get wrong when they try to tell this story. I could have. Under the will, under the verdict, under the no contest clause, I owned 100% of Whitfield Properties, LLC, plus the Buckhead house, plus the $2.1 million in damages, plus the rest of Raymond's personal accounts. I could have walked out of that courtroom with everything. I did not do that. In April, 6 weeks after the verdict, I sold 30% of the company to a black-led investment fund out of Atlanta called Friedman Capital Partners, which specialized in minority-owned commercial real estate. I kept 19% for myself. I put the remaining 51% into a private foundation, the Clara Johnson Whitfield Foundation, which funds full 4-year scholarships for Black women attending nursing programs and business schools at HBCUs across Georgia, Fort Valley State, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, Albany State. The first class of scholars, 17 young women, the youngest 18 and the oldest 42, started their programs in the fall of 2024. Simone moved back to Atlanta and became the foundation's general counsel. She said she had been practicing the wrong kind of law in New York. She said she had come home. Vanessa moved in with me for a little while, not because either of us needed it, but because neither of us had lived with another Johnson woman since our mother died, and it turned out we missed it. We watched game shows in the evenings and drank coffee on the back porch in the mornings. She made cornbread the way our mother used to. I made greens. Reverend Boyd came over for Sunday dinner twice a month. Derek and Ashley moved to Jacksonville, Florida. I heard through my sister that he had taken a job at a mid-sized commercial brokerage and was doing well. Almost a year to the day after the verdict, he sent me a letter. It was 3 pages long, handwritten. It was the most honest thing he had ever written to me. I read it twice. I did not respond. I put it in the leather briefcase behind the 1995 incorporation papers and the 2003 letter and Raymond's 2023 will. Not out of anger, out of respect. Some things belong in the briefcase. Some things belong in the light. You do not have to answer every letter to accept it. I still have the Parker pen. I still have the yellow house on Pine Street in Macon. I bought the mortgage back in July of 2024. The house needed work. I hired a carpenter. He rebuilt the porch swing the way my father had built it in 1971. I go down once a month. I sit on the swing. Sometimes Vanessa comes with me. Sometimes I go alone. In the spring of 2025, Grady Memorial Hospital dedicated a new nursing wing. They invited me to cut the ribbon. They named it the Raymond and Clara Whitfield Nursing Wing. I did not ask them to include Raymond's name. They insisted. They said it would not have existed without both of us, and I let them be right about that, because it was true. I wore a blue dress. The blazer stayed home. After the ribbon cutting, a young reporter from Atlanta magazine, a black woman, couldn't have been older than 26, came up to me with a recorder and a small, careful smile. She said, "Mrs. Whitfield, can I ask you one question?" I said, "One." She said, "What would you tell other women? Women your age, women who have spent years feeling invisible in their own marriages, in their own families, in their own careers. What would you tell them?" I thought about it for a long moment. I thought about my mother, scrubbing floors in Vineville. I thought about my father, carving a desk. I thought about Eleanor Bradford walking past Derek in a courtroom without turning her head. I thought about the sealed envelope at the bottom of a briefcase, waiting 6 months to be opened. I thought about every woman who had ever kept a receipt in a drawer because she did not trust the men in the room. I smiled. I said, "Honey, I would tell them this. They called me a maid for 41 years. The judge called me co-founder in 41 minutes. Silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is just a woman waiting for the right room to speak." The reporter lowered her recorder. She said softly, "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield." I nodded. I walked back inside the hospital, past the new sign with my name on it, and I went to work.